All right, I do blame Meghan Markle. Meghan Markle, stain of humanity. Yes, Meghan, and I hope you're watching right now. I hope you're watching, Meghan, because you are the stain of humanity.
I don't think that she'll ever let Harry go, because she is so fixated on having a title that she doesn't even have or deserve anymore, right? Yeah. Technically, she's not part of the royal family. On paper, on the website, Duke and Duchess of Sussex, and I think that's her biggest. That's anybody's biggest mistake in their entire life, to screw that up.
In December, Meghan Markle was presenting herself as the face of compassion. Carefully lit videos, soft language about balance, healing, and family, a lifestyle brand built on warmth and authenticity rolling out to a global audience. But at the exact same time, something very different was happening far from the cameras. Halfway across the world, her father was undergoing emergency surgery. Doctors had no choice but to amputate his leg after a sudden medical crisis turned life-threatening. He was 81 years old. The situation was critical. And while that unfolded, Meghan didn't appear at his bedside. There were no public calls, no visible visits, only distance handled quietly through representatives. That contrast is what made this story explode. Not because of tabloids, not because of internet rumors, but because of who decided to speak next. Thomas Markle Jr., Meghan's own brother, stepped forward. Not a journalist, not a royal critic, someone who grew up inside the same house, someone who watched the early years long before fame titles or PR teams existed. And now he says he's done staying silent. He's writing a book. And according to people close to the project, it doesn't focus on palace drama. It focuses on the years Meghan never explains, the connections, the lifestyle, the photos that were never addressed. Because this time the story doesn't come from outside critics. This time the story comes from inside the family. Prince Harry wanted to make amends and come meet my dad. Wow. That's just crazy. I'll tell you right now, Prince Harry, if it has to do with anything with the Netflix crew and cameras, don't even bother. My dad's had enough crap from bogus PR stunts to last him for the rest of his life. Long before the wedding bells, the palace drama, or the global fallout, there was a warning almost everyone chose to ignore. In early 2018, just weeks before Prince Harry married Meghan Markle, her half-brother, Thomas Markle Jr., released an open letter addressed directly to Harry. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't polite, and it definitely wasn't vague. Thomas Jr. didn't frame his message as concern wrapped in diplomacy. He used blunt, uncomfortable language, calling Meghan phony, calculated, and a bully. He claimed she wasn't who she appeared to be and warned that marrying her would lead to isolation, conflict, and long-term damage. At the time, the reaction was swift and dismissive. Media outlets painted Thomas Jr. as bitter. Commentators labeled him irrelevant, unstable, or desperate for attention. Supporters of Meghan argued that this was just another estranged relative trying to sabotage a fairy tale romance. The letter became a punchline, not a prophecy. But what made that warning different was its specificity. Thomas Jr. wasn't predicting vague trouble. He was describing patterns of behavior, control, image management, the slow removal of people who questioned her narrative. And once the wedding happened, those patterns didn't disappear. They accelerated. The royal family fracture, the public break from royal duties, the growing list of former allies turned enemies, the non-stop media wars that followed wherever the couple went, one by one, the outcomes Thomas Jr. warned about began unfolding in real time. And that's the part people don't like to revisit now, because when you strip away the emotion and look at the timeline, history didn't side with the critics. Do you sense that maybe a trouble may lay ahead? I've always thought that. Honestly, I've always thought that because, not that I want to bring up the fact that I wrote that letter, but I wrote that letter a long time ago in hindsight of her. Let's start with what proves Thomas Jr. isn't just talking trash about his sister for attention. When people go back and reread Thomas Markle Jr.'s 2018 letter today, what stands out isn't the tone, it's the accuracy. He warned Prince Harry that marrying Meghan wouldn't bring stability. He said it would isolate him from his family, create constant conflict, and leave destruction in its wake. At the time, critics laughed it off as resentment. But almost immediately after the wedding, the fractures began to show. First came the tension with Prince William and Kate, then the quiet distancing inside the palace. What followed wasn't a gradual transition, but a sudden rupture. Harry and Meghan stepping away from royal duties, entirely severing ties with the institution that defined his life. Thomas Jr. had predicted that too. A permanent break, not a temporary pause. Then came the media war. Lawsuits, interviews, documentaries, books, and counterclaims. Allies turned into adversaries. Former staff members once praised became unnamed sources of conflict. Relationships that had taken decades to build were burned in a matter of months. Wherever the couple went, controversy followed. And this wasn't a single incident or misunderstanding. It was a pattern one Thomas Jr. had described years earlier. Control over narrative, intolerance of criticism, a tendency to frame every disagreement as betrayal. Those weren't random outcomes. They were behaviors repeating themselves on a larger stage. That's why this isn't about luck or coincidence. Thomas Jr. didn't guess right once he recognized a pattern early and warned about how it would scale when power, fame, and global attention were added. So when he speaks again now years later, people don't dismiss him the same way because experience has changed the way his words are heard. So Neil Sean put out a video yesterday or the day before saying that Meghan and Harry are on the rocks. Well, I think I called that quite a bit ago and you know, Prince Harry, I told you it was coming. Anyway, the video said that between 2004 and 2011, there's a stretch of Meghan Markle's life that remains strangely thin on detail. On paper, it's simple. She graduated from Northwestern, moved to Los Angeles, and struggled like countless aspiring actors. Small roles, auditions that went nowhere. A familiar broke actress story. She's repeated herself. But when you look closer, that narrative doesn't fully line up with what was happening at the same time. During those exact years, photos surfaced showing Meghan on luxury yachts in the Mediterranean, Monaco, Southern Europe, exclusive parties attended by wealthy older men, people far removed from the world of struggling performers sharing apartments and waiting tables. These weren't casual vacation snapshots. They were taken in elite environments that are typically invitation-only, expensive and tightly controlled. And that's where the questions begin. A broke actress doesn't casually access billionaires' yachts. She doesn't move through ultra-wealthy social circles by accident. Travel like that requires funding, introductions and sponsorship, none of which appear in her official story. Yet, the images exist. Invitations to high-end events were documented. The lifestyle was real. What's missing is the explanation. Meghan has never publicly addressed who those men were, how she knew them, or how those trips were paid for. No interviews, no context, no clarification. Just silence while the photos continue to circulate quietly in the background. It's not that people are inventing a mystery. The mystery exists because the timeline doesn't add up. When one story is told but another is visible, curiosity naturally follows. And those photos, unchanged, unexplained, raise uncomfortable questions that haven't gone away. Do you sense that maybe a trouble may lay ahead? I've always thought that, honestly. I've always thought that because, not that I want to bring up the fact that I wrote that letter, but I wrote that letter a long time ago in hindsight of her saying something about me. When people hear the word yacht, they often imagine a glamorous vacation. But in elite circles, yacht culture isn't about leisure. It's about access. These events are private, invitation-only environments where introductions matter more than money and where being present usually means someone powerful wanted you there. That access doesn't happen randomly. Luxury yachts tied to Monaco, the Mediterranean, or exclusive European events operate through networks. Guests are invited by owners, sponsors, or high-level connectors. Travel accommodations and entry aren't paid for by people trying to break into acting. They're facilitated. Someone opens the door, and once inside, relationships are formed that can quietly change the course of a career. This is why the conversation isn't about accusations. It's about understanding how this world actually functions. Struggling actresses don't just wander into elite yacht environments the way they wander into open auditions. These spaces are controlled. They exist for networking, companionship, and influence building among the ultra-wealthy. Access is selective, and repeated invitations usually means someone sees value in keeping you around. That context matters when evaluating timelines. It explains why those photos raise questions without needing to make claims. It explains why the same people who move through these circles often later surface in high-powered social clubs, exclusive memberships, and career-defining connections. And it also explains why explanations matter. When access appears without context, speculation fills the gap. Not because people want scandal, but because the pattern doesn't match the public narrative. Which is exactly why insiders become important. Because the people who witnessed how access was gained don't need to guess. And this is where insiders matter most. Number 1, no more lying. Number 2, call your father already. Number 3, you're no better than anybody else at all. Guaranteed. And number 4, I paved the way for you to do the right thing on Big Brother. The turning point wasn't a headline or a photo. It was a hospital room. In late 2025, Thomas Markle Sr. was rushed into emergency surgery after a sudden medical crisis cut off circulation to his leg. Doctors had no choice. The procedure became an amputation. And the risk didn't end there. At 81 years old, with a history of serious health issues, the days that followed were critical. Infection, complications, survival itself was uncertain. During that time, one person was physically there. Thomas Markle Jr. He was the one speaking to doctors, the one managing the shock, the fear, and the aftermath, the one watching his father struggle through pain and recovery in a country far from the spotlight. Caregiving isn't symbolic. It's exhausting, emotional, and deeply personal. And moments like that have a way of clarifying where people truly stand. Meghan's response was distant. There were no reports of a visit, no public outreach. Communication, if any, was handled through representatives filtered and formal. While her brand continued to promote warmth and compassion, her family crisis was managed from afar. For Thomas Jr., that contrast mattered not as a PR issue, but as a human one. Watching a parent fight for their life changes how much silence feels justified. Protecting someone's privacy starts to feel optional when loyalty no longer feels mutual. According to people familiar with his mindset, this was the moment something shifted. Years of restraint gave way to a different question. Why keep carrying secrets for someone who won't show up when it counts? Because once loyalty breaks, silence usually follows. Hope people spit in your face when they see you walking down the street. I hope you know they throw human feces at you because of how you really are as a person inside. And look, I know there's a lot of rhetoric and some people won't enjoy that. Now, let's talk about what's happening right now. What continues to stand out in all of this isn't what's been said about Meghan Markle. It's what hasn't. Despite years of speculation, resurfacing photos, and repeated questions, Meghan has never directly addressed the yacht rumors. No interview explanation, no clarification about who she was with, how she knew them, or how those trips fit into her life at the time. Her team hasn't denied it either. They've simply stayed silent. And that silence matters. Public figures deal with false claims all the time. When something is genuinely untrue, the standard response is straightforward: provide context, correct the record, and move on. A single explanation often shuts speculation down completely. Silence, on the other hand, does the opposite. It leaves room for assumptions to grow. That effect becomes even stronger when silence overlaps with missing years. Between 2004 and 2011, details about Meghan's life are unusually scarce. Interviews skim past the period. Public records are thin. Social history feels incomplete. When a narrative jumps from struggling actress to career breakthrough without fully connecting the dots, people naturally start asking what happened in between. It's not about entitlement to someone's private life. It's about inconsistency. When images show one reality and the official story offers another with no explanation, curiosity isn't malicious. It's inevitable. The unanswered questions don't disappear. They wait. And now someone who lived inside that missing chapter says he's ready to talk. Someone who doesn't rely on archived posts or leaked photos, but memory. Which is why the gap matters. Because gaps don't stay empty forever. And that gap may soon be filled. By the way, I put the olive branch out there, so now it's up to you, and you better talk it over with Harry, but whatever, Meghan. Time is of the essence here. If Thomas Markle Jr.'s book does come out with the details he's hinting at, the consequences won't be limited to headlines or online debate. What's at stake is something far more fragile: credibility. Meghan's public identity today is built on authenticity. Her projects emphasize honesty, compassion, and lived experience. She presents herself as someone who struggled, learned, and emerged with wisdom worth sharing. That image is the foundation of her lifestyle brand, her Netflix partnerships, and the trust company's place in her name. If her pre-fame years are shown to be more curated than she's admitted, that foundation starts to crack. Brands don't just invest in popularity, they invest in narrative. When the story behind the person shifts, partnerships get uncomfortable. Viewers begin to question what's real and what's been carefully edited. Content framed around sincerity becomes harder to accept when major chapters of a life story suddenly feel incomplete. Then there's Prince Harry. He defended Meghan fiercely, even when it meant breaking from his family and his role. If new information surfaces suggesting there were aspects of her past he didn't fully understand or was shielded from, people will inevitably question his judgment, not maliciously, but realistically. Did he know the full story when he made life-altering decisions? And here's the part PR teams can't fix. First-hand testimony doesn't behave like rumors. It can't be buried with silence or reframed with press releases. Once someone who was there starts naming details, the narrative shifts permanently. Which brings us to the real issue. Allegedly, of course, we have to say that word sentence, but in the beginning, look at her demeanor. In the beginning, she was so humbled, right? So appreciative to be in the position where she was at and not overstepping her boundaries. This story was never really about rumors or gossip. It's about who controls the narrative and for how long. For years, Meghan Markle has maintained that control through silence. By not engaging, not explaining, and not filling in the gaps, she shaped a version of events that moved forward without resistance. And for a long time, that strategy worked. The questions lingered, but they stayed in the background. Now, that balance may be shifting. Thomas Markle Jr. isn't a commentator reacting from the outside. He's someone who watched the early years unfold in real time long before publicists' branding or carefully crafted messaging existed. And unlike critics or tabloids, he doesn't rely on speculation. He relies on memory. If he chooses to speak fully, the story no longer belongs to one side. Because once first-hand testimony enters the conversation, silence stops being protection. It becomes vulnerability. Narratives don't collapse all at once. They fracture slowly as unanswered questions finally meet answers. And that leaves one question hanging over everything that comes next. When someone who watched it all decides to speak, does the image survive?